Michael, welcome, Malone. It's very, very good to have you here, and a massive, massive welcome. Allah Nasran Shi. Now, kind of like the world of kind of Elvish and the Elvish language is a beautiful one which I would really like to share with you. But first, it's worth bringing up there are two kind of primary kinds of Elvish. There's Qenya and now the Sindarin. Now, Qenya is a lot older, particularly primitive Qenya, and actually quite primitive Qenya kind of came about at the time where the elves in the ages of the stars kind of like awoke, and they awoke in the land called Qenya. And some of them went to actually stay with the gods in Valinor, and some of them stayed in Middle Earth. Now those who stayed in Middle Earth are kind of, they didn't receive the kind of full kind of tuition of the Valar, the gods, or the servants of the Maya, and therefore became less educated than their kindred who travelled to the land of Valinor, but they still became very educated, very wise and very knowledgeable. And their king was Elvish, who had actually seen the two trees and seen the Valinor. And he actually married Marion, who was one of the Maya, so one of the servants of the Valar. And for her love of King Thingol, Marianne actually stayed in Middle Earth for a very long time until her husband was essentially killed by the dwarves. Part of the reason the dwarves and elves are so kind of at each other's throats at the time of the Lord of the Rings, and she actually went back to Eleanor at that time. But kind of, there's a lot of history, and history in language for Tolkien was something that was really very closely connected with each other. But anyway, this kind of will be a very nice, light, hopefully, introduction to Elvish. I'm trying to make it kind of as enjoyable as I can. I don't want to bore you to death with loads of language stuff, but I want to really immerse you in the world of Tolkien. And I'm doing this because I hope to do an ASMR entirely in Elvish at some point, because it's such a relaxing, such a flowing language. And also because Tolkien's mythos is fascinating, and I'll be doing these videos alongside my videos on the Silmarillion. I'll still be doing kind of ASMR and stuff like that, but I'll also be making ones on the world of Tolkien and on the languages that they're in. Elvish really being the primary one to focus on. Now, the elves who stayed behind them didn't go to Eleanor. Some of them kind of wandered and were like the dark elves, particularly a famous elf who stayed in Nan Alamoth, who actually married the sister of King Torgon, and that actually in the end led to ultimately the downfall of Gondolin, where Gondolin was a very ancient home and lost stand against the powers of Morgoth. Of the lands of the elves. But anyway, I kind of diverge there. I do apologise. I'm so enthusiastic about this. I'll probably be diverging a lot. But you'll probably hear for some Elvish. So let's kind of like begin with some Elvish. So I'm just going to read you a poem to give you a feel for the language. This video, I will be really trying to give you a feel for these things and a bit of context for them, and I'll be focusing on beginning to teach it fully in the next video. So, let's begin with this. So, a poem which was developed by the elves who were trying to cry out to Vardar in Middle Earth, and they were crying out to Vardar because Vardar is essentially the god of the stars and all astro things, and she is arguably the antithesis, the opposite of what Sauron, it's kind of like Dark Empire, stands for. And actually, Frodo calls our name, but using the name Elvish, which is one of our many names, on Weathertop when he was stabbed by the Mongol blade. And that's part of what actually made the Nazgûl free, because they were actually frightened to hear that name and wondering if this hobbit was actually in the league with Valhalla and the gods in the west. So Valhalla is very important, and although the elves could travel and actually meet Valhalla in the land of Valinor and leave Middle-earth in the Third Age, many of them, particularly the Teleri and the Wandering Folk, and many of the Sindarin didn't leave Middle-earth for love of Middle-earth. But they would often try so hard, and this is one of the poems which they might well use. And it goes, Alvarez Gilfonian, Sidabrang Panam Merehela on Penalagla Alana, Nakale Panam Merehela, or Gala Thramming and Norlas, and Nuilos Lady. Now that was, I know, pretty quick, but it was worth kind of like bringing it up there. Now, another kind of phrase, and this might be something you're perhaps more familiar with, is the inscription on the ring. Now, the inscription on the ring is written by a language that Sauron himself devised, and it's called Black Speech. Now, Sauron made this language partly to kind of like identify him as the Lord of Middle-earth, and partly to also restore some kind of order, because he loved order, he loved, things being, controlled. And so, he wanted to be the god of Middle-earth, but unlike Melkor, he didn't really have a nihilistic attitude. He didn't want to destroy everything. Instead, he wanted to be king and really sit in the place of Manwë. And so he developed a language. But what the actual words on Black Speech, he used the sigils of the elves, the Elvish kind of way of writing scripts, which is arguably a massive offence to the elves, but it does show you how much he kind of admired them, even at the heights of his power. Because he actually used their script to write his Black Speech on the One Ring. And the thing on the One Ring goes, Ashnaz Dorbatul, Ashnaz Grimbatul, Ashnaz Lakatul, Agnozum Ishi Krimpatul. Now that's just kind of like the phrasing that is mentioned on the One Ring. As I say, this is actually Black Speech. It's one of the few kind of things we have in Black Speech which aren't kind of insults, because the orcs like throwing insults. So we have a few words in Black Speech, many of them are mildly impolite, but this is one of the few things that we have properly in Black Speech, so I thought it was worth sharing with you. But importantly, in Middle-earth, we have two main languages. We have Qenya, and we also have Sindarin, which were kind of adopted by the Sindar. Now, Sindarin was actually the common tongue when the elves actually returned to Middle-earth after they'd disagreed with the gods. At least some of the elves did return, particularly those of Mordor. And those of Mordor kind of adopted this because the people of Middle-earth were slower to grasp the Valinorian tongue that they spoke than the people than the elves who came from Valinor were to learn the Sindarin tongue. Now, the language that those in Valinor developed and those that stayed in Middle-earth both ultimately have their roots in Qenya, from it to Qenya being the original language of the elves, so all elvish things can ultimately be derived from there. And the key difference is kind of Sindarin sounds very kind of like Latin-like. As it's fluid a bit, it has structure, it has a lot of consonants, whereas kind of like Qenya, it tends to always end in a vowel. It's very flowing, like it's very elegant. There isn't really any staccato in it. It's more like a flowing river. So that's kind of what Qenya is like. So you can tell by hearing them quite quickly what's Qenya, what's Sindarin. So no, that's really worth bearing in mind. And yeah, well, I really hope you'll be alright. I know this has been probably slightly introductory, and I'm trying to balance out the fact that I don't want to scare anybody away with throwing too much Elvish, but I hope this has been a good introductory video, and wishing you all the best, and please check out my channel for more stuff. Thank you.